There's a word for that thing we've been talking about for years. And it's heterofatalism. Ooh, actually, maybe I should step back before I drop big words. Heterofatalism! Heterofatalism, oh, it's my favourite new word. Okay, let me just dial it back a sec. Fill you in. You may have clicked onto this video not expecting to see a small woman with a mullet screaming about the heterosexuals. So just to explain who I am, my name is Tara Mooknee, and this is the only channel on YouTube where all videos are written and produced by a cow. And she is heterosexual, but she won't be in the video today because she's actually on a Tinder date. So you've got me instead. But if you like and subscribe, she might appear in the next one. Now, let me just make a disclaimer. This video isn't going to be straight people suck. I swear I'm not heterophobic. I've got lots of straight friends. Now that that joke's out the way, let me just quickly define heterofatalism, formerly known as heteropessimism. The word was coined by Asa Seresin in her article On Heteropessimism. In short, it's the belief primarily bemoaned by straight women that heterosexuality is a prison, and dating and relationships with men are hopeless endeavours. That's the super condensed version, and there will be a chapter in this video looking at that essay in depth. Before we do that, I'd like to analyse what exactly straight culture is, if it even exists. Let me just go get changed. Oh hi! Today we're going to learn about straight culture. Firstly, why does straight mean heterosexual? It started as mid-20th century slang among the gays, stemming from the phrase to go straight, as in straight and narrow. G.W. Henry popularised the term in his 1941 book, Sex Variance, a study of homosexual patterns. He used the term to describe men who identified as ex-gays. As you know, it's now a colloquial term for heterosexual people. And that's it. And now, let's talk about the invention of heterosexuality. I don't mean sexual reproduction or men and women getting together, I mean as an identity. The 1901 Dorland's Medical Dictionary defined heterosexuality as an abnormal or perverted appetite towards the opposite sex. Ooh. 2 decades later, in 1923, Merriam-Webster's dictionary similarly defined it as morbid sexual passion for one of the opposite sex. But then in 1934, the definition softened to manifestation of sexual passion for one of the opposite sex, normal sexuality. In her book, Straight, The Surprisingly Short History of Heterosexuality, Hannah Blanc describes how the 19th century heterosexuals went from merely existing to being defined. Prior to 1868, there were no heterosexuals. Basically, sexual behaviours were identified and sometimes even outlawed, but the emphasis was always on the act, not the agent. Hungarian journalist Karl Maria Kertbeny coined the words heterosexual and homosexual. Kertbeny used the term heterosexual a decade later when he was asked to write a chapter for a book arguing for decriminalisation of homosexuality. So he was pro-decriminalisation before it was cool. No one knows exactly why heterosexuals and homosexuals ought to be different. Heterosexuals and homosexuals are considered different because they can be divided into 2 groups on the basis of the belief that they can be divided into 2 groups. So the idea of sexuality as an identity is fairly new. I'm not going to go deep into whether we are born straight, gay, bi, whatever your identity is. Authors like Brandon Ambrosino and Jane Ward have written about this in great depth. In short, they argue that sexuality is much more fluid than we generally believe. We aren't born this way, whichever sexuality we identify. This does not mean that it's a choice, but just that it isn't a fixed truth in nature. I would like to add that Jane Ward does ask this question in her book, Not Gay: Sex Between Straight White Men. What would it mean to think about people's capacity to cultivate their own sexual desires in the same way we might cultivate a taste for food? Which suggests some agency over our attractions. I'll quickly interject with my own feelings on this, as someone who's not an expert, so bear that in mind. I don't think this is necessarily good nor bad. What makes me fearful about this is if we accept that our identities aren't fixed, it will bring forth some additional challenges to gaining civil liberties. A lot of rhetoric behind LGBT liberation is, we don't choose this, and I'm born this way. Now, I don't know if you know this, but people can be kinda dumb. So if LGBT people say, I'm not born this way, but I wouldn't exactly call it a choice, reactionaries and anti-LGBT activists will hear the first part and run with it. So you admit you were not born with it?
You were brainwashed.
I knew I shouldn't have let you watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That being said, if we've been saying this whole time that this isn't a choice, believe me, if it was, I wouldn't choose this anguish, and people still callously say, just pray the gay away, then maybe it wouldn't make much difference. I mention this because I want to highlight the growing school of thought that sexuality is fluid and fixed sexual identities are, don't bully me for saying this, a construct. To summarise, men and women will still have sex with each other, but heterosexuality as a social marker, as a way of life, even as an identity, could be deconstructed. If there's an end to heterosexuality as a social identity, the same would probably happen to the rest of sexual identities. Would this mean the end of queer culture? Because a lot of queer culture, like Pride for instance, is a reaction to being ostracized by mainstream, i.e. straight culture. So if we erase identities, would that make everyone equal? And if it did, would that lead to all the subcultures dying out? I don't know. I just like talking. This has been a long-winded way of me getting to straight culture, and the two main questions I'll try to answer today. A, what is it? B, does it actually exist? One definition is the expectations and gender roles imposed on heterosexual relationships. You know, like traditional marriage is straight culture, buying a house in the suburbs and having 4 kids and getting a golden retriever. I'm not saying gays can't have golden retrievers, just that's the image that I have in my mind. And in dating, I would argue it's the social rules that are divided by gender. Men court, women say no several times until they can't be asked to reject them anymore. Play hard to get, girlies. Kidding. One could argue that we live in a straight culture because it is assumed that you are straight. One has to come out as not straight. Others might define straight culture as more specific characteristics and actions straight people do. Straight culture as performative straightness. Stuff like gender reveal parties, I hate my wife jokes. You don't actually love a person unless you occasionally want to kill them. My best friend's wedding shoot. Help! Why would a fly land on something like this? Rats should be ashamed for falling in this trap. Bears! This is ridiculous! Scariest thing I could think of. Portraying men and women as polar opposites like cats and dogs. This isn't to say that this is what all straight people do, but more that these are caricatures of straightness. And because we live in a society where being straight is the default, these actions haven't been scrutinised in the same way that gay culture has. Until recently, don't worry, I'll get there. You know, the people that say, don't teach about gay relationships in schools, it's imposing sexuality on the kids, let kids be kids! But then do shit like this. Moms hold magical mini wedding photo shoot for their kids who love hanging out together. A caricature of straightness that I admittedly indulge in is the reality TV show Love Island.
She grabbed my face like this. She would like literally yank me, and I was like, "What? She forced me to kiss her."
Don't say it like that. That's really horrible.
She's all over me, isn't she?
No, I wouldn't agree with that at all.
You're giving me evils.
Huh?
You're giving me evils.
Don't like the way you're talking about her.
Oh, babe.
I think it's disrespectful.
Is it?
Yeah, I would say that is disrespectful. You're trying to make it look like it's really one-sided, and I would suggest that it's not.
It has been described as straight camp, which is painfully accurate.
I bet you don't expect a Scottish accent coming out of this.
Oh my god.
Any contestant not coupled up is at risk of being dumped from the villa, which is a handy metaphor for the pressure to find a partner, settle down and start a family by a certain age. For a queer viewer, it is all extremely, irresistibly confusing. Why are these adults all applauding each other like athletes for achieving lip locks? Why are they celebrating like high schoolers over each other's high school-esque relationship title upgrades? Why do they all appear to think that having sex is a bit uncomfortable and immoral, even as they simultaneously spend approximately 14 hours a day maintaining and intensifying their signifiers of sexual desirability? If we reject the first definition I gave of straight culture, which is merely we live in a society where being straight is the default, let's take a greater look at straight culture being a performance of straightness. A culture that finds comfort in binaries and condemns those that don't fit into these binaries. Most men are like Bluetooth. He is connected to you when you are nearby, but searches for other devices when you are away. Women are like Wi-Fi. She sees all available devices but connects to the strongest one. That doesn't even make sense. You know Wi-Fi can be connected to multiple devices at a time, right? Girls nowadays learning to do makeup instead of cooking. What do you expect your man to eat? The foundation? Can't wait for men to die of hunger and go extinct because they refuse to use their own hands to make their own meal. Greatest campfire roasters ever! Heels or wheels? What will baby be? So I guess these images and memes raise an important question. Are the straights okay? Which is a Reddit page that has been active since 2019 but seemed to boom in the past year. And I think it's a great example of inside jokes within the LGBT community about heterosexuality becoming visible to a mainstream audience because of social media and Reddit.
Cis couple were pregnant. Dry grass fields.
Some people get offended by these memes, but for the most part, I think the target of these jokes are people who either present disdain towards LGBT people or feel the need to declare pride about their heterosexuality, or cause havoc for the rest of society. And I think it's important to highlight that, from what I could find, these pages aren't picking bones with heterosexual attraction or relationships, but rather the unnecessarily rigid gender roles and social customs that some straight people feel the need to perform. It's time to look at the final definition of straight culture, and that is straight pride. And in this definition, straight culture does not exist. It is a manufactured culture which is a direct reaction to LGBT pride in order to find an identity.
You do not fit in here. Okay, we will make our own place. Why are you excluding us? Oh no.
The concept of straight pride has been around since the 1980s, but I'd like to focus on the straight pride event that happened in Boston in 2019. It was hosted by a group called Super Happy Fun America. and attracted several hundred participants that were outnumbered by protesters. Super Happy Fun America called the event a response to the identity politics of the left. So it was a troll.
We want tolerance, just like everybody else, and we have a right to tolerance. A celebration of our sexual orientation, just like other people celebrate theirs.
At first, but it revealed some truths about what the people who attended the event genuinely believed.
Love Jesus with all my heart, and being straight is great, and I believe that we have not stood up for that, and that we have suppressed it to the point where when your children come home automatically thinking it's okay to be gay, then we have not done our parts as parents. It's not okay to be gay.
The pink is for girl and it has the female symbol, and then the blue is for boy and it has the male symbol.
Do you individually or people that you know ever faced violence because of your sexuality?
Not over my sexuality.
Good.
This type of event attracts people who, whether willfully or not, do not understand the need for LGBT pride. Either they genuinely believe that LGBT rights are a non-issue now, or they acknowledge that a significant proportion of LGBT people are marginalised, but that's okay with them, which is disheartening, to say the least. They see that queer people have found a community and identity and get to celebrate who they are. And they think, I want that. I want a slice of the pie. If straight culture can only be defined as a reaction to queer culture and as the status quo, then isn't it redundant? And straight culture, if there even is one, will likely die out soon. Recent surveys have indicated that fewer young people identify as straight than ever, and the number of young people identifying as bisexual are increasing. If we move away from the idea that we fit into either or categories and move towards viewing sexuality as a spectrum, would straightness as a social model persist? Or will queer culture, because it is an umbrella for many subcultures, blur into the mainstream as fewer of us strictly label ourselves? Well, I don't know. What I do know is that I said this video was going to be about heterofatalism, or heteropessimism, or heteromiserableism. So I guess I should talk about that infamous essay now. But quickly, I need to go change my look to fit the change in tone. I won't waste your time with an introduction. Asa Seresin wrote an essay titled On Heteropessimism in October of 2019 for the New Inquiry. I enjoyed it very much. It's a good read and you should go read it for yourself. Before I talk about this, I'd like to point out that Seresin has changed the term to heterofatalism. So when I read this, I might say heteropessimism, but it's now known as heterofatalism. I started using heterofatalism instead of heteropessimism to make totally clear that there is no parallel between heteropessimism and Afropessimism. This is not to chide anyone else. If people use heteropessimism, it's my fault because I originally wrote it that way. Heteronegative, as in sex negative, also works. Jane Ward used heteromiserableism, which I like too. There are a lot of options. Seresin opens the essay by quoting Maggie Nelson in her memoir, The Argonauts. Heterosexuality always embarrasses me. Heteropessimism consists of performative disaffiliations with heterosexuality, usually expressed in the form of regret, embarrassment, or hopelessness about straight experience. Heteropessimism generally has a heavy focus on men as the root of the problem. That these affiliations are performative does not mean that they are insincere, but rather that they are rarely accompanied by the actual abandonment of heterosexuality. There's a sense that this feeling is of the moment. Sure, some heteropessimists act on their beliefs, choosing celibacy or the now largely outmoded option of political lesbianism, yet most stick with heterosexuality even as they judge it to be irredeemable. Even incels, overflowing with heteropessimism, stress the involuntary nature of their condition. Let me explain what political lesbianism is. It was a practice in the 1960s among second-wave radical feminists as a way to stick it to the man by not letting him stick it in. Sheila Jeffreys helped to develop the concept. When I use the word help, it sounds like I'm praising her, which I'm definitely not, because I think this idea is bad. In fact, Sheila Jeffreys has a lot of bad ideas. So yeah, just bear that in mind for what I'm about to talk about. There's gonna be some wild takes, so strap in. When she co-wrote in 1981, Love Your Enemy, the debate between heterosexual feminism and political lesbianism. They argue that women should abandon their support of heterosexuality and stop sleeping with men. What heterosexuality is about and why it should be abandoned. Sexuality. What part does sexuality play in the oppression of women? Only in the system of oppression that is male supremacy does the oppressor actually invade and colonize the interior of the body of the oppressed. Attached to all forms of sexual behavior are meanings of dominance and submission, power and powerlessness, conquest and humiliation, while encouraging women to rid men from your beds and your heads. Political lesbians didn't necessarily have to sleep with women, just not with men. They can be celibate or identify as asexual. The Leeds revolutionary feminist group definition of a political lesbian is a woman-identified woman who does not fuck men. In their eyes, women who were in relationships with men were collaborators and complicit in their own oppression. But it sounds like you are saying that heterosexual women are the enemy. No, men are the enemy. Heterosexual women are collaborators with the enemy. All the good work that our heterosexual feminist sisters do for women is undermined by the counter-revolutionary activity they engage in with men. Being a heterosexual feminist is like being in the resistance in Nazi-occupied Europe, where in the daytime you blow up a bridge, in the evening you rush to repair it. It goes without saying that this is an outdated and shitty movement. Lesbians aren't lesbians because they hate men. They're lesbians because they love women. It's got nothing to do with men. And to LARP as a lesbian to make some political point is a form of lesbian erasure. I'd also just like to quickly clarify that I'm not trying to invalidate the identity of some political lesbians. So I'm not trying to say that they were all just LARPing as lesbians. But the ideology encourages that, to live as a lesbian even if it's not authentically who you are. And to say women who are with men are complicit in their own oppression is... Let's not even go there. The phrase was coined by Emmeline Klein in her essay, "The Smartest Women I Know Are Dissociating." I've noticed a lot of brilliant women giving up on shouting and complaining, and instead taking on a darkly comic, deadpan tone when writing about their feminism. This approach prevents overtly horrifying facts about uniquely feminine struggles and delivers them flatly, dripping with sarcasm. Dissociation feminism is the cool girl or chill girl's cousin. I would argue it's a performance to A, cope with the struggles of being a woman, and B, perhaps even be a new strategy for male acceptance. And I don't mean that in a scathing way. We've got to get through to men somehow. Women are often stereotyped as needy, overly emotional, and jealous. Think the overly attached girlfriend meme. Growing up, I remember getting subtle and even explicit messages saying that women have a tendency to be jealous partners. But from living, I have learned that men are also capable of jealousy. This early meme is less a portrayal of actual behaviour than a goofy male nightmare. The suffocatingly overcommitted partner against whom freewheeling men like to define themselves.
If I was your girlfriend, I'd drive you up the wall.
Interestingly, the meme originally emerged from a video parodying Justin Bieber's 2012 hit Boyfriend, which begins with the now famous romantic threat, "If I was your boyfriend, I'd never let you go." As is fairly common in straight culture, a negative trait like obsessive jealousy, which in reality is one of the most commonly cited triggers of male on female domestic violence, is repackaged and sold as a female trait. Wait, what? Are you f***ing kidding me? Heteropessimism's anesthetic effect is especially seductive because it dissociates women from the very traits, over-attachment and the over-intensity of feeling, for which straight culture is determined to make us feel ashamed. The word anesthetic is important here, so keep that in mind. Quite often framed as an anti-capitalist position, heteropessimism could be read as a refusal of the good life, of marital consumption and property ownership that capitalism once mandated. Yet this good life, which was always withheld from marginalised populations, is now untenable for almost everyone. Millennials are getting married at lower rates and are having children later, and some not even at all. Marriage and even monogamy are becoming less necessary. That being said, singleness and hookup culture have become industries in capitalism. The goal of many hookup apps is to keep people single and on the apps. There's a climate of hopelessness among the straights. So, why is this happening? What is going on here? Multiple studies have shown that across socioeconomic classes, women's increased participation in the job market has not been matched by nearly as significant an increase in men's labour at home. 3 days before Valentine's Day in 2020, the New York Times reported that young men, just like old men, still don't vacuum. Women are still more likely than men to be unhappily married. Journalist Darcy Lockman was inspired by frustrations in her own marriage to write All the Rage, Mothers, Fathers and the Myth of Equal Partnership. An investigation into why, in households where both parents work full-time and agree that tasks should be equally shared, mothers' household management, mental labour and childcare contributions still outweigh fathers. And then her husband was like, she explores how in France, whilst there is less overtly feminist rhetoric, women report a lot less anger and frustration with their husbands, in large part due to distributive care by the French state. Free universal daycare and other social programs take on a significant amount of the burden of raising children, whilst American and British mothers don't receive enough help from their husbands or the state. So I would argue that it's totally understandable that women feel pessimistic. And I'd like to add that this fear of heterosexual relationships being doomed isn't just felt by straight women. Bisexual women feel this too.
Yes, I'm bisexual. I'm attracted to women because women are incredible. And I'm attracted to men because I love making bad choices.
In two different ways, I would argue. First, that despite many bi women being equally attracted to men and women, or perhaps even preferring women, they are more likely to end up with a match. It's important to consider that, to this day, bisexual women still feel invalidated. Straight married bi girls are like those kids who studied abroad in college and 5 years later are still somehow weaving it into every conversation. Like, we get it, Krista, you lived in Madrid. Attitudes like this are still more common than they should be in the queer community. And it's an unfortunate reality that bisexual and pansexual women face. And of course, the queer dating pool is smaller because we still live in a society where it's not safe for everyone to come out and people are assumed to be straight. If you date men, people might assume that you just like men and you're not a potential companion. Conversely, I've met bisexual women who, despite being attracted to men, much prefer relationships with women. And it's not just a case of I find women more attractive or the sex is better. I had a friend in school who, after she came out as bi, stopped dating men outright because she found that dating women meant she felt less pressure to perform certain gender roles and cater to the male gaze and all that shit. So basically, even if straight women become outnumbered by women who identify as not straight, we may still have heteropessimism, or fatalism, or
heteromiserablism.
Although this feeling is understandable, it poses a host of problems and is arguably unproductive. If heterosexuality becomes shorthand for misogyny, the proper object of critique falls from view. To be permanently, preemptively disappointed in heterosexuality is to refuse the possibility of changing straight culture for the better. Spinning on its wheels, endlessly repeating, going nowhere, heteropessimists and queer theorists alike are convinced that this is heterosexuality's permanent fate. I think they're wrong, that there's evidence heterosexual culture is changing, but even if it weren't, we would have to believe it could, because tens of thousands of women are currently dying of it every year, murdered by their husbands, boyfriends, or exes. For a long time, heterosexuality's normalization allowed it to be endlessly repeat, immune from any substantial change. Couldn't have said it better myself. Which is why I don't write essays. I write YouTube scripts that include emojis. Remember when I talked about political lesbianism earlier? Another problem with this attitude is that it puts queerness on a pedestal while simultaneously trivializing it. You know what I'm talking about when straight women say, "Gosh, I wish I was a lesbian," and you're like, do you though? Yufei Wang wrote, "Heterosexuality and its discontents, why straight women seem to malign heterosexuality with such frequency," where she highlights how heterofatalism argues that men are the problem, and as a result, shames women for liking men. Placing the responsibility for heterosexuality onto women reflects a wider trend that deflects responsibility for structural problems onto individual choices. If only we recycled more, we could stop climate change. If only women would make different choices, heterosexuality would disappear and take with it all its problems. The misogyny arises from the fact that only women are expected to make different choices. Seresin points to Harren Walker's podcast, Why Do I Like Men? Specifically to the episode where Larissa Pham states,
"Heterosexuality is a prison."
She tells Walker that she likes men because
you were drawn to that which destroys you.
But then Pham does manage to cite reasons for why she likes men, such as
big arms and like I like abs and I like penis and like I like the way men smell.
For all their obviousness, these observations are quite rarely voiced. Hearing them spoken so plainly exposes how heteropessimism has worked to silence articulations of women's desire. You can hear the smirk in Walker's voice as she delivers the question at the beginning of each episode. But it is also a sincere inquiry. In asking and re-asking the podcast's eponymous question, Walker pushes through heteropessimist anesthesia and reawakens her own vulnerability. In this light, heterosexuality is not a terminal diagnosis, but becomes a possible site of experiment and change. To summarise, if we believe heterosexuality is eternally doomed, then we are stunting potential progress. Now, you might be wondering, how do we make said progress? Well, I don't know, for sure, but I have some thoughts. Let me just change into a more optimistic look. I think I'm giving strong wine aunt energy. I'm not drinking wine because I don't drink wine, so instead I've got ginger ale. Hashtag not sponsored. Be careful not to spill this because this is a rental. Do you want a bit of ginger ale pouring ASMR? Oh, I'm your straight edge wine aunt. It's almost over, kids. Thanks for watching this all so far. Do you not have anything better to do? That's probably not the best marketing strategy, is it? We ended the previous chapter on Seresin's analysis of the podcast, Why Do I Like Men? Walker pushes through heteropessimist anesthesia and reawakens her own vulnerability. In this light, heterosexuality is not a terminal diagnosis, but becomes a possible site of experiment and change. I don't know about you, but I think that's rather lovely. If heterosexual relationships are broken, the solution isn't for women to just stop dating men. That would be forcing them to repress their desires. Men become objects of our desire because, despite any supposed detestability, they are worth loving. Why would it be surprising that women continue to have sex, fall in love, and build lives with a category of person that makes up nearly half of the total population of all people on Earth? And yes, men are trash jokes can be funny, and there might be some truth in the saying that the good ones are always gay or taken. But rather than just accepting that we don't like how men are conditioned to behave in relationships, why don't we work out how we want them to change? And demand it, damn it! Heteropessimism reveals something about the way we can remain secretly attached to the community of the very things we sincerely decry as toxic, boring, broken. Faced with the possibility of disappointment, anesthesia can feel like a balm. So I would argue that this relates to the conversation surrounding toxic masculinity. I remember once reading a fun little analogy, like, not all burgers are cheeseburgers, and not all masculinity is toxic masculinity, which to me implies that there's positive masculinity. I might do a full video on this, so I'm not going to go into depth. There's an argument to be made that positive masculinity could be just as harmful, because it's imposing gendered expectations on men, and we should abolish gendered expectations in general. And I hear you. I'll talk about that in said video. But assuming that we accept that positive masculinity is a thing, then it's important for us to have ideas about what it is. Likewise, if there are problems in heterosexual relationships, shouldn't we have positive traits to aspire to? So long as there are men and women, women are going to continue to have sex with men and fall in love with men. Instead, we do not need to end heterosexuality. So much we need to end how much heterosexuality matters. We need to allow love to flourish outside of paired partnerships. We need to know that any characteristic any of us might be attracted to exists in people of all genders. Remember earlier when I mentioned Darcy Lockman's book, All the Rage, Mothers, Fathers and the Myth of Equal Partnership? The findings in the book suggest that the pressures on marriage and raising children can be alleviated by encouraging a culture in which we are all, as a community, as a society, responsible for each other's well-being. But the state should help raise our little tykes. And this solution wouldn't even ask men as individuals to do anything differently. Bada bing, bada boom. I know it isn't that simple, but I can't fix society. I'm just here, making videos. I'm not changing society, just complaining about it. Ultimately, the downfalls of heterosexuality come from the downfalls of gender. One of my patrons made a good point, and it was about men who incessantly joke about hating their wives. And it's a small example of internalized toxic masculinity. It's not manly to express your feelings, to show affection. Fellas, is it gay to love your wife? So, in conclusion, Seresin's essay is very interesting and good. I hope I did it justice. And go read it. Heterofatalism is real, and I agree that it's meaningless without action. I do think that the onus isn't just on straight women to improve heterosexuality, and I think that men could learn a lot from this essay. If heterosexuality is a construct, then it can be deconstructed. Bars! I didn't come up with that. So that's the end of the analysis / scholarly part of the video. I spent a long time researching and writing this video, with supervision of the cow, of course. This wouldn't have been possible without all the brilliantly written articles and resources I used for this. And thank you for watching this all the way through. If you've made it this far, A, you get a cookie. I will be sending it to you by mail. How do you have my address? Don't ask that. You won't like the answer. And B, leave this emoji in the comments. I'm currently watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer and I'm absolutely loving it. My only complaint is that it doesn't have enough bat representation. So you posting the bat emoji in the comments would help greatly. As for the subscription pet shoutout, oh boy, or girl, or MB, we've got, I don't really know what it is. This is Nim, and he's Patagonian cavy. The Patagonian mara is a relatively large rodent, so not as large as a capybara, which is the world's largest rodent. This herbivorous, somewhat rabbit-like animal is found in open and semi-open habitats in Argentina, including large parts of Patagonia. It is monogamous, but often breeds in warrens shared by several pairs. Oh, so they're monogamous, which is good to know. What are warrens? A network of interconnecting rabbit burrows. Ah, so they only get with one person, but they don't mind doing it in front of others. So they're not 100% traditional. Anyways, Nim is an angel and makes this noise. He's 3 months old and he's still growing. He's like a mini capybara that can get up to 30 pounds in the wild. They live in Argentina, and when he gets excited, he does a little hop. He doesn't like rodent chew toys, only dog dental chews, and absolutely loves going out on walks and out to the store and meeting people. He's also met a dog who must have been very confused. I have to say, this is a new feeling. I've never been so confused whilst feeling so much love in my heart. I don't know what you are, Nim, but I would die for you. A round of applause for this boy. And that is all. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, because 1 like equals 1 lettuce leaf for Nim. And make sure to subscribe to become a little subscription, because when you become a little subscription, I will keep you underneath my pillow in the other room with the rest of my little subscriptions. And that's everything. Thanks for watching. Dog bless. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now. Fun fact, Anya Taylor-Joy wore this dress. I don't know if she wore this exact dress, but she wore it, so that means we have something in common. Anya Taylor-Joy, call me. I didn't realise the whole time the bow on this dress was down when it should be like this. It's not stitched. Come on!